Awesome. Welcome. So excited. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, we're so excited to have you. We're going to let some more people come in. But in the meantime, we do have a poll up asking for where you're tuning in from today. What's your garden experience? And where do you garden? So super excited. Yes, Alyssa, I'm excited.
Yay. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for that. We're excited too. Thank you for joining us. Hello, everybody. Come on in.
Beautiful. I have a lot of home gardeners. I'm excited. Nature gardeners, community gardeners, school gardeners.
Everybody gardeners.
They're just gardeners.
Here a gardener, there a gardener, everywhere a gardener. Come on in.
Oprah would be proud.
Yeah, you know me. You get a garden and you get a garden and you get a garden. Come on in, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to see so many people flooding in.
Yes. And thank you to all the folks who are coming back for day 2 of the Grow Garden Series. So happy to have you. I love you too. Gardens for everybody. Yes. Beautiful.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us from Eastern PA. That's awesome.
Nice.
Y'all, as you are entering, let's take Jennifer's lead. Shout out in the chat. Where are you joining us from? What garden? What state? What country? Let's get to know each other. Oh, yeah. Shout out to the Bronx. Yeah.
Okay, Brooklyn. Brooklyn, we out here.
Oh, nice. Hi, David from Hudson Valley.
Nice.
Hi, Queens. Hi, Jenny. Hi, Jessica from PS38. Hi. Yo, we're going to give just one more moment for folks to join us and settle in, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
Nice.
And I'll just say to Judith's question, this is a webinar version, so you can't see other folks, but you can chat, you can, interact with folks in the chat, and you can only see me, DK, and Chantel.
Yeah, and our other esteemed colleagues.
And wonderful Laura. Laura, say hi to the people.
Hi to the people.
We see you, Harlem Lenox Avenue. We see you. Thank you for coming. Hi, Diamond. Nice. Hi, Laura. Thank y'all for joining us. We're going to start momentarily.
Yes, and just reminding everyone that you can write in the chat to everyone, or you can write specifically to us as the panelists. So if you do want everyone to see your message, make sure that that to button says everyone.
Y'all, we are excited. And we're excited that we're feeling that energy in the chat. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Okay, awesome. So are you guys ready?
Let's do it.
Jump in. So I love the poll. We can stop the poll, but I just wanted to highlight that folks are, primarily in New York, but also coming from outside of New York. We have a lot of beginners. We have some folks that have been in the trenches, been in the weeds, and then we have some experts also here, community gardeners, school gardeners, nature gardeners, home gardeners. So really excited for all of you guys to be here today for us to talk about the story of Ancestral Foods. All right, next slide. And so we are GrowNYC. We protect the environment, create green space, help people stay healthy, and give them the opportunity to make a positive impact. And our work is primarily around conservation, education, green spaces, food access, and agriculture. So super excited. Today in this workshop, we're going to talk a little bit about what ancestral foods are. We're going to talk about a relationship with ancestral foods. We're going to talk about ancestral foods as communication and also ancestral foods as spiritual connection. So I hope you all are super excited and ready. Also want to highlight that this is a series. So yesterday we had our amazing workshop talking about spring gardening. So if you want to go back and see that, you can just go on our website, www.grownyceducation.org, to see the recording and see the resources for that. And then tomorrow we will also have another workshop talking about gardening for climate change. So I hope you guys stay tapped into the entire series. And we look forward to kind of kicking you off today with ancestral foods. So I want to introduce myself. I'm there in the corner, Chantel Kemp, garden coordinator, and also introduce my other esteemed colleagues. DK, Tutu, do you want to?
Hey, y'all. I'm DK, and as Chantel said, I'm an esteemed colleague. I am so hyped right now. I'm ready to just kick this off. Tutu, go ahead with your introduction, and let's get it going.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tutu Badaru, and excited to be back in. Used to work with Chantel and DK and doing some other work at GrowNYC, but excited to be talking about food, especially food that is, so deep and dear to our hearts. Back to you, Chantel.
Beautiful. So now I'm going to pass it to DK and Tutu, who are going to lead us through our community agreements for this workshop.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. As we kick off what we know is going to be an impactful, insightful, emotional, and amazing conversation, it's really important that we set up some boundaries, some community agreements that will make this space a space of inclusion, liberation, and communication. And when we establish these community agreements, we all agree to them just by being in this space. They are statements that not only we as the facilitators are going to hold each other to, but we're going to hold the room to, and we want all of you to hold us and each other to as well. The granddaddy of all community agreements is simply respect comes first. You may hear some things today that may arise a great and wide spectrum of emotion, trauma, anger, joy, sadness, resilience. We might not all agree with some of the things that are said today, but when we're in this space, and hopefully when you're in your other spaces, we have to respect it. When we talk about food, there can never, ever be food shaming. Food and culture is intimate, it's sensitive, it's personal, and it's deeply rooted in tradition. And for those reasons, it's important that we don't judge. And the way of saying that we don't judge is simply saying, don't yuck someone else's yum. What might not be appealing to you might be gold to someone else. Honor and respect that. We're going to hear a lot of things today that for some maybe is new information. Be patient and be mindful that we might all be in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. We have a variety of educational experiences and backgrounds and cultural experience. Finance, faith alone separates us in many ways. Allow for learning moments. Be kind and recognize that maybe not everyone is where you are in your personal food journey. Always refrain from making sweeping generalizations and assumptions because those lead to stereotypes that can take generations to dismantle. When you're speaking, please speak for yourself and not for the group. Speak from your own experience and speak from I and not we. Tutu, share with us how intention versus impact impacts you.
Sure. We want to, we all know that words carry weight, and we're asking you to be thoughtful around your intention Think about how what you will say will land with others and the lasting impression it may leave behind today. I think you can tell from all of our community agreements, we're asking you to think of other people when you're talking, when you're sharing. And next, we also want you to expand your vision and to reframe your mind and to recognize beyond a Western-centered history. You will hear a lot of really great stories around food. What you might be surprised to hear is that they're not from a Western viewpoint. We hope that you will take this journey with us, that you will hear the stories that have been left out, the stories that have been isolated from that history, that you will be open to new things, like DK was saying, open to learning, expand your vision, reframe what you might have thought coming in. Essentially, we're asking you to be open to what we're sharing, to be open to the stories that we're bringing to your attention and to the conversations that we will see in the chat. So,
and when you're being open,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Tutu. When you're being open, it's always important to listen to receive, not to respond to retaliate. Simply put, chill. You might hear some things that just rub you the really wrong way, but take for granted that none of us has come here to inflame or upset. We've all come here with good intention to share and learn. Chantel?
Beautiful. Thank you both for leading us through that, because like we said, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be sharing is new, and we all kind of went through our own growth journey and growing journey as we created this presentation. So super excited. And like DK said, we will be holding everyone to these community agreements, and we hope that you also hold us to these community agreements as well. All right, next slide. So food as ancestral connection. So before we begin, I think it is important for us to acknowledge our ancestral connection. Food plays a tremendous role in our lives. It soothes, fuels, teaches, and heals us, among many other things. It is a connection to our histories, our stories, and even our habits and patterns. Ancestral food allows us to think about our food landscape and lineage in order to guide us towards understanding the intentional choices of what we grow today and why. Paying tribute and exploring the foods of our ancestors allows us to give homage to those before us and build community and legacy to come. We honor, pay tribute, and share today a mere glimpse of just some of the ancestral foods that have tremendous intergenerational and global impact in our food culture. So I just wanted to share that statement, and now ready to jump in. So what are ancestral foods? And for the purpose of this workshop, we are centering ancestral foods from Africa, across the African diaspora, and the Caribbean. So ancestral foods are wholesome, natural, organic, local, indigenous foods that our ancestors grew and ate for thousands of years. Ancestral food is the relationship between the land, people, food, and culture in a way that is inherited, familiar, and lineal. And so we are so excited to explore some of the countries and continents that have played a huge role in how and what we eat today. DK?
When we talk about relationships with food, it's important to know that relationships and connections with food, as we said, are personal and intimate. Food itself reaches back to the beginning of time, and food history and travel has greatly impacted and shaped society's understandings of our meals and traditions. Today, we're going to talk about food origins that have mapped the blueprint for many landscapes we know today. Today, we'll touch on some ancestral foods that are the foundational staples of households around the world. When we talk about our relationships with food, it's important that we acknowledge our connection with them. And simply put, food is a connection to self. It's a connection to community. For me, it's a friend, it's a comforter, it's an educator. And I'm smiling because when I think of food, food is love. It's memory, it's practice, it's history. Next slide. We're going to kick off today with talking about one of the most well-known juggernauts in the world, rice. We talk about rice. It's important to know that rice is one of the most diverse staples across many cultures globally, and it's second only to wheat as the most consumed base food in the world ever. There's not many places in the world, if any, that have never heard or interacted with rice. Rice is extremely versatile in that it can be eaten as a main dish, as a dessert. It can be eaten any time of day. It can transform dishes, and it's actually the pilot of some dishes that some of you may know. One of those dishes is very dear to me, and pictured here, we have a dish called jambalaya. Jambalaya is a dish that was born in Louisiana. It is both Creole and Cajun, and it's a dish that includes wonderful warming spices. It includes tomatoes. It can include sausage, and it also can include seafood. Another dish that might sound familiar to you as I'm talking is paella. But before we even go further into this rice journey, it's important to recognize the dish from Africa that started this all off, and that is jollof rice. The first known origins of jollof come from Senegal, and jollof is also very popular in Ghana and Nigeria. And again, jollof is actually the base rice for jambalaya. It's the base rice for paella. You know, as I'm talking, I'm curious to know, what rice dishes have impacted y'all? Shout out in the chat for me. What rice dishes are y'all rocking with? What rice dishes evoke memory and joy and emotion for you and your family? Another really great benefit of rice as a food is that it's really economical. You can buy it in large sacks. You can share it with community members. And in my house, where we have a lot of family members, and for myself as a cook, rice is really awesome because I can make it in large volume. We don't just see how impactful rice is in the food world. Rice is that gift that keeps on giving. It's not only good to us on the inside by being delicious and gluten-free. Rice is also good to us on the outside. Rice and rice water has been known to be preventative and corrective as a hair treatment for hair loss and hair thinning. The protein in rice is actually good not only for your hair follicles, but it creates shine, and it's a great, great ingredient for your scalp. Rice not only impacts us in food and health, but one area that you might not know that it also greatly impacts us is spirituality and ceremony. We traditionally, many of us, maybe not all of us, I'm following my own community agreement. Let me dial that back. Let me start over. I have traditionally seen rice thrown at weddings. But did you know that rice and throwing rice is also a practice for funerals? Traditionally, this practice of throwing rice was associated with early Roman tradition. But factually, this was a practice that was being used in Africa and Asia well before the Romans got a hold of it. Rice is thrown ceremonially at weddings as a blanket. It is protection against the new couple to ward off evil spirits. It's also a way to welcome prosperity and good health to the new couple and the family that they have become. When we talk about the funeral side of things, rice does the exact same thing. It's a blanket to protect those grieving from evil spirits, but rice is also given as a dish, as a comfort and consolation. Oftentimes we talk about rice as food, we talk about it as health, we talk about it as ceremony, but we would be strongly remiss. We didn't talk about rice, as with many other foods ancestrally, as an act of rebellion. We've seen rice across many spaces, and rebellion is not always one that's fun to talk about, but Chantel, Tutu, and we don't shy away from the harder conversations. Like many foods across the world, rice is a symbol of freedom. And when we talk about food as resistance, that food can take many shapes and forms. But no matter the shape or form, food is always meant to create resources of freedom and agency. An area where we talk about rebellion, a pivotal time in American history would be the transatlantic slave trade. Next slide. We have before you here maps that chronicle the movement of rice, but before we dive into those, I really want to uplift that way before the transatlantic slave trade, which was pivotal for the movement of rice, trade and exchange was happening all over parts Africa, Asia, and South America as early as 700 to 1000 BC. And trade was happening on both the east side and the west side of Africa successfully and freely. And this is just an important statement that's important for us to make. Forgive me because I'm getting a little emotional as I talk about that. But as we talk about the movement of rice, these maps illustrate the specific areas that rice moved from Africa to the Americas. And when we talk about this movement, again, we can't ignore one of the most pivotal movements and moments in US history of the slave trade. It was at that time that African farmers were captured and relocated for their knowledge of not only just growing and their expertise of crops, but to mitigate territories that their captors were not always able to handle and manage. And these African farmers and engineers and scientists and chefs and cooks turned these spaces into thriving crop areas that eventually became the impetus and catapulted commerce and economy in the Americas. One place in the Americas where rice specifically was most seen to be a very well-known cash crop was South Carolina. It grew so well in South Carolina because rice does well in warm, hot, humid temperatures. And once the people of that territory realized this, it became a gold mine. And that South Carolina economy was able to fuel wealth across other areas of the world. Chantel, jump on in.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're doing just an amazing job walking us through this profound history of rice and how West African farmers along the rice coast were really taken for their expertise and really were, captors were in swampland that they had like never been in before. And we have been successful cultivators and hunters and farmers. And so, our expertise was definitely needed for the cultivation of food and grain in American society. And so really happy that we're going to be talking about this. And then DK is going to walk us through some of the elements of growing rice.
Next slide. So when we talk about rice, we can't just talk about it as a staple for our past and our present, but it's really important to recognize rice as a building block to our future. Rice is traditionally grown in areas known as fields, marshes, wetlands, and paddies. And rice thrives in full sun, typically temperatures of 70 degrees or more. Rice grows at its best when it's in humid, wet environments. We've got some germination tips here for you. We've got some conditions and sowing and transplant, maturation and harvesting tips that everyone will get to study more in depth. This video will be sent to all participants joining us today. And while these tips are very important, there are a couple of things that I want to point out particularly. We see our first image of the grain of rice. It's important to mention that rice actually starts as a seed. So please don't go to the supermarket and attempt to cultivate your rice from supermarket rice, because that's not exactly how it works. We see that photo, that's actually a photo of long green rice. And the seed is going to develop so that it produces a flower that's going to have a hole on the outside of the seed. And once that hole is removed, that's the joy, the inside that we know as rice. Rice thrives in large areas like paddies and marshes. Coincidentally, rice can also be grown in kiddie pools. But before we get there, we must start with our seedling and our germination. We have a photo there of rice starting out in a very small pot. And then we also have a photo showcasing that rice is actually going to grow into very tall plants with stalks. The stalk is actually going to funnel oxygen into the rice below. Many people think that rice needs to be started, in large spaces, but that's actually not true. You can start rice by simply soaking the seeds for anywhere from a day to even 3 days to really help that water loosen up the seed. And the reason you're doing that is because it's going to help eventually water to be able to penetrate into the seed as it's growing. Rice is typically grown in zones, USDA zones, 10 to 12. And these are just zones like Louisiana, Florida, and the Carolinas that traditionally see that warmer, more humid, wet, marshy climate that we were talking about. But did you know that we're seeing rice in other places? And one of the places that we're seeing rice in is my favorite state, New York. We're going to toss to a video that we hope you'll enjoy of farmers in New York growing rice. Next slide, please play the video.
Laura, don't forget.
I'm very happy to be a farmer here in America. I came all the way from Africa, Gambia, to get here to be a farmer. This is what we know. Grow what you eat what you grow. How are you? How are you?
How are you?
What I really appreciate with you guys, it's like, okay, let's do an experiment and we can
see. Yeah.
I always say actually the best research is done in farmers' fields because that's where there's the reality and where it's most relevant.
Look, that one, the one I just last. You see that one?
So beautiful.
Beautiful,
We have a little bit the two objectives. The one is to, improve the practices on their farm, so it becomes very directly beneficial to them, but then also to create a new manual or guidelines on how rice also can be planted in the Northeast.
We hear that people have an off day, people have a relaxing day, but me and Mustafa and Malik, we don't have that days. Bend down, take this, you turn the soil to the farm. That's how our parents teach us how to live. That's why we never forget this.
For American farmers, it's a novelty, They were like, oh, now let me try to grow a crop I don't know. For the immigrants, it's like, let me try the crop I know in a different environment. And so when you combine these principles, you will be able to, out of one grain of a crop, you could create a big harvest with less water, with less seed, sometimes up to 90% less seed, 30 to 50% less irrigation water. They can produce more with less.
Thank you. Grow what you eat what you grow. The concept of producing more with less. I'm so excited because rice isn't the only area where we're just seeing exploration in different areas of the country. A shout out to the Bronx, even though I'm from Washington Heights. I happen to be stewarding at a space of which we're going to be trying rice, and I can't wait to share with you all how that works out. Next slide. Chantel, take it away.
Beautiful. I love that video. And every time he sings, I just dance a little bit. It's something in my soul that's just soothed.
It's just so happy.
Yeah, I started singing it to my partner. And it was like, what is happening here?
I'm going to have to learn the words so I can sing it when I'm growing.
Yes, me too. So that's a beautiful transition to talk about food as communication. And so food can be used to tell very different stories, as we saw with the farmers singing, right? There's a story that's being told while that food is being grown. And food can also be used to distinguish one's culture or cultural practices. So I'm going to be using Callaloo as an example. We'll explore a couple of different ways that it's prepared and how that relates to region and reason. And so Callaloo has been consumed for thousands of years. It's an ancient indigenous green leafy vegetable, also known as amaranth, and it's also similar to spinach, but it has a stronger flavor. Callaloo can be traced back to the 1400s, originating in West Africa, from regions like Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. And the original versions of Callaloo was prepared like Palaver sauce or egusi. Did I say that correctly?
Egusi.
Egusi, thank you. Egusi stew, which is pumpkin seed, bitter greens, and meat. Other regions where Callaloo are prevalent are Jamaica, Grenada, Virgin Islands, and Trinidad and Tobago. Tutu, I would love for you to talk a little bit about Callaloo and Uganda.
Sure. I was sharing with Chantel and DK that I'm from Uganda. If you don't know where that is, it's in the middle of Africa, East Africa, right next to Kenya and Tanzania. And one of the first things that was shocking, because we work in the farmers markets, was seeing them selling Callaloo for money. Where I come from, Callaloo is free. It grows everywhere. It was a way for families to like bulk up foods if they didn't have a lot of like protein. But it also is this sort of like lifeline and source of nutrition that didn't require an exchange of money. It was just sort of like the earth grew it, and it was useful to feed us. So it sort of took me, a little bit of time to get used to the fact that I had to exchange money for my Callaloo. But I'm loving us talking about it, and I think what is great about this conversation is to see the connections across the world with all of these foods. Back to you, Chantel.
And then let's go to the next slide, because I do want to highlight Callaloo in different forms. And so we talked about what the origination of it is, and now I want to showcase it from a lot of different perspectives. So this first picture we have is Callaloo prepared Grenadian style in a tradition called oil down. And so I loved reading about oil down, because oil down is basically the one pot, right? Oil down is, there's a big celebration, family members are going to come over, and when family members come over, everyone is going to bring one item, and all of those different items are going to go into this pot to create this beautiful food that we're all going to share. And then when the food is finished, the Callaloo is placed on top of it. And so I love that Callaloo is basically bringing folks to the table, is basically saying the food is ready. It's now time for all of us to eat together, and that can be communicated like without words, just by looking at the food, that the food is ready. Another way that Callaloo is prepared is a Jamaican kind of stir fry style, which is like more of the way I've eaten it in my home. And so Jamaican Callaloo is prepared with tomatoes, green onions, saltfish, and dumplings. And I loved learning about this, because then I started to learn about the origination of saltfish, and also how Callaloo from Virgin Islands is in parallel with it. And so when ancestors were captured and brought to different parts of the Caribbean or brought to different parts of the Americas, they were fishers. A lot of them were hunters and gatherers. And so they would, find their own fish, or they would hunt for crab along the shorelines. And the ancestors were dissuaded from doing that from captors. So what they would do is they would heavily salt the fish. And so that way, if you ate it just the way that it was, you would die from dehydration or malnutrition. And so there came the process of learning how to process the saltfish and eat it the way it is prepared now. So just the fact that folks are eating saltfish to this day with Callaloo is an act of resistance. Also, the fact that folks are eating crab with Callaloo is also an act of resistance in the Virgin Islands, because those were acts that our ancestors were literally barred from doing in captivity. So I just loved just the parallel of like how, our stories are being interwoven into the food and has been translated across culture. Another way Callaloo is prepared here is the Trinidadian style, as the soup prepared with okra leaves. And, as a young girl, anytime there was some sickness or my mom heard a little cough, it's like, okay, down to the soup. And you're going to eat all this soup until it's finished and you feel better, right? And so just seeing all the different ways that it's prepared and seeing this soup really brought a lot of warmth into my heart, because it really translated just that homey feeling, that feeling of comfort and that feeling of safety and health for me. And so I know folks are probably like, folks that never tried Callaloo or ate Callaloo or been exposed to Callaloo are like, okay, you showed the pictures, that's nice, but what am I supposed to do with this? And so we have an awesome video to share with you of how to prepare Callaloo Grenadian style.
Chantel, shout out to Judith. Judith just said, I'm so hungry. Judith, we share your sentiment. I'm starting to get real hungry too. It's a good thing y'all can't hear my stomach growling.
Hi, I'm Kennedy Roberts, also known as Chef Kennedy from Home Hospitality, Grenada. Today we're going to be doing a stewed callaloo, and it's a very simple Grenadian dish that we will transform the callaloo leaves into a delicious stewed callaloo, and then you can even transform it further into a cream of callaloo soup. In this video, we're using just over a pound of chopped callaloo leaves, 2 heaping tablespoons of chopped green seasoning, 1 cup of coconut milk, and salt and pepper to taste. To start, we use 2 tablespoons of olive oil and saute the chopped green seasoning for about 30 to 60 seconds. We then add 1 cup of coconut milk, stirring the mixture. Hot sauce and salt are then added to taste, and we continue to stir, ensuring the flavors infuse well. We now add roughly 500 grams of callaloo leaves, or like I said before, just over 1 pound. It may look like a lot of callaloo leaves, but they shrink as they cook. Coat the leaves with the seasoned coconut milk mixture and let simmer for 4 to 6 minutes. The liquid will begin to dry up, and that's when you know it's about ready. Make sure the leaves are cooked thoroughly and then taste.
Purchase your tracks today.
Gorgeous. I love that video. DK and I have a running joke that Kennedy is everyone's grandfather.
He is. He's just so wonderful. We don't even know him, but in our heads, we know him.
And yeah, in my head, it's like a pseudo grandpa teaching me how to make callaloo. And so I want to talk a little bit about how to grow Callaloo. As Tutu was talking about earlier, Callaloo is super easy to grow. And so I think one of the things I really want to highlight is just Callaloo is naturally resistant to a lot of pests and a lot of diseases. It can grow in a lot of varieties of different soils, from loam to clay soil. Is also drought resistant, so you don't have to worry about, watering it all the time. Like Tutu said, kind of going to grow. It's going to just grow. It's going to do its own thing. So I really love that. It doesn't have to be super hot. It would like a lot of sun, but it can survive in kind of a shady area. And just for tips for harvesting, you can either cut the individual leaves, kind of like what you would do if you were harvesting collard greens, or you can cut the entire stalk depending on how tall that it grows. I know Tutu, DK, you guys were going to jump in to talk about some of the other great benefits of Callaloo.
Yeah, I'm now feeling like Callaloo is an icon of resistance. It sort of just grows everywhere, regardless of like whether you plant it or if you don't. It sort of shows up. At least, where I grew up, it was never something we had to think about. It just always showed up wherever food was being grown. And because it's so ubiquitous, it always provided a very important source of nutrition. DK is going to share some of the nutrition benefits with us, but for a lot of families that couldn't afford to buy food with money, they could trust and lean on Callaloo to be a source of protein and a source of food for them, and a source of seasoning, because you could add a bunch of other things to it as well. DK?
Yeah, Renee, you gotta try some Callaloo. Get in on this. I wanted to spotlight Alexis was curious about the seasonings. Callaloo, like many foods, will just vary in your own personal taste, but I have experienced that Callaloo is best when you just, keep it simple: salt, pepper. Callaloo can be cooked with onion. A lot of times in my home, I'll actually dice some sweet potato to kind of bulk it up and feed it to family. Callaloo is actually known as a superfood in parts Africa, the Caribbean, and South America. And it's particularly known as a superfood because its greatest power is that it's very high in iron. This is really great for our blood. It's also really great for muscle structure and muscle mass. And as with any food, consult with your doctor regarding more nutritional facts that may work best for you. But Callaloo is a win all summer long.
Wonderful. Yeah, and so I wanted to just move into the next part, food as spirituality, and Tutu is going to lead us through this amazing part.
Thank you. Some folks are asking, where can you buy some Callaloo? I know that they're specifically at the Grand Army Plaza. There's a farmer who sells Callaloo, and more people and more farmers markets around New York City are selling Callaloo. Thank you all. So we've been talking about food as a form of communication, but we all know that food plays a very important role in spiritual ceremonies and rituals. It's often the most essential part of those rituals and ceremonies, but it also helps to focus one's spiritual intention. We're going to use coffee here as an example of food as a spiritual connection. We're going to explore its origins, the movement of how our its movement across the world, and how our ancestors used it to connect to their own ancestors and deities. Next slide. I have pictured here a setup for coffee that's in the style of the Bedouin people, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. But if you read any books on the origin of coffee, they very what's the way to put it? Conveniently leave out a lot of oral history and oral tradition, and a lot of people have said, because it wasn't in a book, they can't look to the origin, at least the stories that I grew up around coffee as the exact origin of it. So when you're reading about coffee and its history, the stories that come out of Arabia are often quoted as the origin of coffee. But as we all know, especially folks who are Black and from African and living in the diaspora, that a lot of our stories don't make it to history books. They're passed down from ancestor to predecessors. And so I want to share a story around coffee. So a story in Ethiopia is told about a goat herder called Kaldi. And he was one of the first people who has been recorded as discovering coffee and the benefits of coffee and being able to eat or ingest coffee. So Kaldi observed that when he herded his goats and they ate from a bush that had red berries, that they would tend to be overactive, very energetic, and have a hard time sleeping. Sounds familiar. So he went and told the story to his family, and no one took him seriously. It was just goats. They thought he was just telling stories. But then this story somehow ended up in a monastery, and he was telling one of the monks about what he had observed his goats doing. So at first, when the priest got to see what Kaldi harvested these berries and handed them over to the priest, and he took them for granted, and he also again thought, this is another story, I'm just going to ignore it. So the way the story goes is that the priest threw the berries into a fire, and he noticed how fragrant it was. And the way food works is like, we eat with our eyes, we eat with our nose. So it was very attractive to the monk, and he decided to try and brew it. And that is essentially the first time that coffee was brewed, right? But if you look in historic writings, coffee wasn't commonly roasted for drinking until the 1400s. And so when, as I mentioned, the origin of coffee is really attributed to places in Arabia. And so how did it end up there? As DK said, before the transatlantic slave trade, there was a lot of very successful trading happening across Africa, across Asia. And so, excuse me. Before I move on, actually, I also included some of the local names for coffee. In Ethiopia, it's called Buna, and in the Middle East, it's referred to as Kawa. And so in the 15th century, coffee's popularity had grown, and there was a trader who wanted to be able to grow that also in his home. He came from the Middle East in what was called the Yemeni district. And he was one of the first people to transport it over to Yemen. And they started to grow it, and it started to become popular, not just at home, but also in meeting places. And a lot of the stories around coffee involve men sitting together, drinking coffee, sharing ideas, sort of like a hub for wisdom and a hub for social connection. But also, there are a lot of stories told about Sufi religious leaders and imams who spent long hours poring over ancient texts, praying all night. And they realized that when they drank coffee, it helped to increase their spiritual intoxication. The experience was deeper, the experience was more intense, but also they could stay up for longer. And also, there were some physicians who noticed that when they prescribed coffee to patients suffering from digestive issues, they often tended to see improvement. Next slide. So I want to share a little bit about this map shows just like the way coffee moved from, you see here in Ethiopia, where it started out, how it ended in Yemen, and how it came from the Middle East to the rest of the world. And what I find interesting, but also sort of conflicting, and you'll see that in a lot of the stories we're telling around food, is I grew up in Uganda, and it wasn't until like 10 years ago that you could get coffee that was roasted in Uganda. We grow a lot of coffee. It's one of our major exports, but many Ugandans weren't actually drinking coffee, right? So even though coffee started in the Middle East, it wasn't until the 1900s when the British came and took over Africa, came and colonized our countries, that coffee ended up coming back. So it's sort of contentious, because we know this is food that comes from our lands, it comes from our people. but then the way it was reintroduced to us was through our colonizers, right? And that's why sort of DK said in the beginning, like, you know, the stories around food are deep, they're traumatic, but they're also healing, right? DK and Chantel, do you have anything else to add?
I think you covered it. You got this, Tutu. You
Thanks,
got
friends.
this. Keep going. You got it. You got it. Keep going.
Thank you. And it's sort of the reason I wanted to share this story around coffee, because it's so close to where I'm from. It's so close to my heart, but it's also so far because you know, that deep connection to it was sort of stolen or tainted, but excited to as Chantel said, like, I'm excited to reclaim it, excited to see my family and my friends reclaiming coffee as their own. And then next, I just want to share a little bit. Thank you. I want to share some ceremonies that I grew up around that were performed by people from where I came from. So for some of you, the term Blood Brotherhood might be familiar. You might, I'm going to invite Chantel and DK later on to share some of the experiences around this word. But when I grew up, we were told of stories of men who wanted to form really strong bonds with one another. These were men who want, you know, siblings, they weren't related to each other by blood, but they wanted to have some connection that was so strong that if this pact was basically broken, spiritual deities would be invoked, or even death in some cases. So in central Uganda, there are tribes that tell of a ritual where coffee beans were used in what they call the Blood Brotherhood pact ceremonies. So what would happen is two men who wanted to forge this really strong relationship with one another, would welcome the community, and they would have this ceremony where they would crack one coffee bean into half. And then they would split, they would get a knife and slit their navels, and then take their half of the coffee bean, rub it in their navel, in the blood that's coming out from their navel, and then exchange it with one another. And then in order to seal that pact, they would eat each other's coffee seeds that were soaked in blood. And basically what they were saying with one another is that our relationship, goes beyond just blood relationships. And if, we're making a pact to be together, to be one with one another. And if anybody, if anyone breaks this pact, if anyone breaks this deep relationship, what would happen is that either they would die, sometimes it was that serious, or they would invoke the spiritual deities to basically come and impart the punishment on the person who's broken the pact. DK, can you share your own experience with the word Blood Brotherhood?
Yeah, first I would like to uplift that we're at the 4:53 mark, and if we run over, we really hope that you all will be able to stay with us for the conclusion and close of our presentation. I'm actually just stalling for time because I'm trying to recover from that informational fact that Tutu just shared with us, and the fact that I am not that strong. That is really gangster. But I do want to share that where we have seen this practice in other parts of the world, most commonly is in Hollywood. Perhaps you've seen a movie or a show where the hero will be with their companion and they will simply cut their hand and blood will trickle out, and the companion will do the same. They will lock hands as if to say they are brethren or sistren for life. And this is the courage and the support that they're gonna then take to conclude whatever their climactic journey is going to be. I personally would rather go in a different direction, but I do appreciate honor and tradition. Chantel?
I just love that, things that we kind of see being immortalized have a origin, and where that origin comes from and how that connects to our relationship with food. And I do want us to move on to the next slide, because I do want Tutu to walk us through coffee in different forms.
Thank you, Chantel. And as I mentioned, coffee was first grown in the eastern part of Africa, specifically in Ethiopia, and what is now also Eritrea. And to this day, there are always coffee ceremonies whenever people are drinking coffee. I was sharing with DK and Chantel, like after reading and, studying and preparing for this, when I look at my, morning cup of coffee, it sort of hits different because of all the reverence around it. And so in Ethiopia and Eritrea, when coffee is made, it's always made for the community. They start out by roasting the seeds, and that sort of acts as a call to everyone. Hey, we're making coffee. Come and have coffee with us. It's basically an invitation to anybody who can smell it, that we're preparing coffee and it's for everybody. And you can see in these two pictures that they're often serving it with multiple cups, not just the one. And that's sort of the thing with Ancestral Foods, the farther away we are from them, the farther away from the reverence, the farther away from like the historical significance, which is why this conversation is really important for us, just to remind us of like how, all of the things that are involved in the foods that our ancestors ate and how different it is for us. So this is hopefully for you an invitation to remember that, to remember the importance of these foods that we are sharing. I also wanted to share the setup in the Middle East, because as I said, it started in East Africa, but also very popular in the Middle East. And this setup is for the Bedouin tribe that is it's a nomadic tribe that normally inhabit the desert. And they have a similar setup to what you see in Ethiopia and Eritrea, but are using pots that are metallic. And I did share the Brotherhood Blood Pact, but also people are actually consuming coffee, if you're curious about that. So there are tribes in Ethiopia, the Oromo tribe, who have created lots of foods around coffee plants, such as bunakela, which is a mixture of butter, salt, and roasted beans. This way of eating coffee was actually also, taken on by our ancestors from Sudan who were captured and being trafficked to other parts of the Middle East before they were transferred to other parts of the world. They obviously were being starved and not given enough food to sustain them. But then they picked up from the tribes that if you mix coffee and ghee, that you can have food that actually sustains you. And so again, you have this conflicting, but also healing and traumatic relationship with food. And I want to invite DK also to share some of her own experience with the mixing of coffee and butter.
Sure. Tutu, thank you so much for that tap in. And I want to acknowledge something that you shared that motivated me to think about. And that is, it's just so important that we have these conversations to stay connected to ancestral foods. The further disconnected and the further we move away from our ancestral foods as communities, we're losing touch with our histories and our practices. And when we're disconnected from histories and practices, we are often more susceptible to oppression and control. So we really want to encourage you to know that the conversation doesn't stop here. Please have these conversations in your communities and, with your family, with your loved ones, with your friends, because learning starts with conversation. When it comes to coffee and the nutritional facts, coffee is actually good for you. It's not the caffeine in the coffee that's bad for you. It's the amount and consumption. As we said earlier, always consult your doctor or your healthcare practitioner about amounts. But the honest answer is that when you add things like ghee and butter to coffee, they actually slow down the amount of caffeine going into your blood. So this means that it just sustains your energy source over a longer period of time. Butter and fat in coffee are also great ways to prevent blood sugar spikes. And one of the reasons, many reasons, that coffee is actually such a great vessel is because it receives other foods like butter, and more importantly, mushroom powders, which are great for calm, anxiety, energy, and a number of other reasons. Coffee Queen Chantel, I know you got something to say about coffee.
No, I just love it. It's so good. It's so it really does give me a boost throughout the day. But I do want us to jump into growing coffee because I know folks are probably really interested in what growing coffee looks like.
Yeah, thank you, Coffee Queen. I feel like that's going to be your name from now on. You might be wondering, okay, thanks for sharing about coffee. As a gardener, can I grow it? And the answer is yes. So coffee in the wild, outside of your home, outside of your garden, actually grows in the shade. So it doesn't actually need full sun like you would for, for rice. So you can grow coffee indoors. You can grow it in a greenhouse. And we've shared some of, the best, we've shared some tips and instructions on how you can do that. But there are a couple of things I do want to highlight. Make sure you water your coffee regularly. You have to keep the compost moist, but make sure it's not waterlogged. You liquid feed it every 2 weeks, and make sure you keep coffee away from children and pets because the leaves can be toxic. And also something else to highlight is that the beans of coffee are actually seeds. As DK said, please don't get your coffee that comes from the grocery store, that comes from wherever you're getting it, that's already roasted coffee. So you have to make sure that seeds are actually not roasted. So pre-roasted coffee seeds can be used to grow more coffee. DK and Chantel, do you have some benefits for coffee, especially with growing, that you want to share?
Yeah.
Chantel, you're freezing up, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump in and so you come back to us.
Or the liquid coffee, different ways, different coffee ground.
Sorry,
Chantel, we can't hear you.
That.
We can't hear you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I think you two covered it. Next
Great.
slide. We've talked a lot about ancestral foods today, and we hopefully have broadened your knowledge, your connection to many of these foods. We wanted to create a slide that you see in front of you that places a few of the foods that we talked about in specific categories and highlights other foods that might also be known in those categories. Two equally important areas that we were not able to spotlight today in the interest of time, but we did want to bring to your attention, and hopefully, again, you will continue the conversation, is food as a commodity and food as a textile. In these areas, we see other ancestral foods that are known throughout the world and might have connections to you. Next slide. Chantel, take us home.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And so ultimately, everything that we have been talking about today is our relationship with food, right? How self plays into how we communicate with food, how our environment plays into our relationship to food, how our culture plays into our relationship with food, and even how our communities play into our relationship with food. And so food really comforts us, it carries us. It's a common bond that we all share. It's a great educator, from seed circles to story shares with elders to recipe swaps. Food are identifiers of where we are from, our generational practices, and our traditions. And so I hope that you all have developed a deeper relationship with food and continue to cultivate new relationships with food that you eat, that have been passed down to you, and that you are now trying to explore in your lives. Questions? And so I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. I will come over to the chat, and just if anybody wants to ask questions, we are here, open and available.
And while you're asking questions, Laura, if you can please shoot to our contact slide. Everyone, again, this recording is going to be sent to everyone who signed up for the series. We do have a slide full of resources for you to learn and explore more. But again, just as we're sharing with you that the conversation doesn't end here, we know as well that it doesn't end here. We know that we've brought up a lot of things that might stir up a wide spectrum of emotion for you. And we want to be responsible stewards and say, reach out to us for more information. We hold very seriously that this was not an easy conversation for many to have. And we want to extend our hand in love, kindness, farmship, and farmily and stewardship to say, if you're feeling some kind of way, reach out to us. Let's keep that conversation going. Let's always support each other. Let's cover each other and protect each other. And let's just grow together on the land and as community.
DK, there's some folks that was beautiful. Some folks are asking about growing callaloo in a garden. And I believe you and Chantel have very successfully grown that in your gardens at NYCHA.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Not just gardens at NYCHA, but we're seeing callaloo explode in gardens in the Bronx and Brooklyn specifically. It's important to know, everyone, that you really should know your growing zone. New York is both 7A and 7B. So whether you're growing rice, callaloo, or anything else, you really want to select items that are going to thrive well in those situations. Of course, we're seeing exceptions like rice being grown in a 7A or 7B, but to save yourself money, anguish, and time, just have a plan when you're growing any of these foods.
Yeah, and I think, like I shared, callaloo is super easy to grow. It needs like a climate of like 55 degrees. We hit that mark, yay, right? It doesn't it doesn't take a long time to sow. Pretty much, I think the maturity rate, the germination rate is 10 to 15 days, and it's mature within 30 to 45 days. So pretty much like a month and some change, and you'll have some callaloo. So just make sure that you're picking out your seed vendors reputably. I know True Love Seed, I recommend them all the time. Some folks use Johnny's. It's really up to your discretion of like what seed vendor you guys want to like work with. But callaloo is like super easy to grow. If you look on YouTube how to grow callaloo, there's literally just farmers just sprinkling the seeds on the soil. And so there's really no rhyme or reason. You could be really particular about like, making them farther apart than they need to be. But even if they're pretty close together, they're fine because they are disease resistant. So super easy to grow, honestly.
In conclusion, get you some rice, get you some callaloo, and get you some coffee.
Oh God. Yeah, I just love this chat. Also, folks sharing information about how to grow coffee inside. We have resources for that. We have resources on how to grow callaloo, how to grow rice. And so everything will be shared when we send out the presentation. Beautiful. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone so much for being here today, and for being open and available and just being so respectful and wonderful in the chat, sharing your stories and your recipes and your advice and your resources. This is really what community looks like for us, and this is why we were so excited to create this presentation for all of you.
We did it, y'all. I think that's it. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.